It's nice that we can use Power Query to retrieve data from Acumatica, but sometimes you want to give users a way to filter down what gets returned. So let's take a look at using parameters, giving someone the ability to enter parameters in Excel, and that gets used by that Power Query connection. First, let's set up a Power Query connection to Acumatica. So I'll do that with an OData feed. This is my Acumatica URL. Yours is probably your company name.acumatica.com. Then you need /OData, and then you need your tenant name, /your tenant name. So let's connect to that. And I'll use this generic inquiry. Now normally I like loading things into the data model, but for the purpose of this example, I'm just going to load it right back into Excel. So it's retrieving that data from Acumatica. It created a new sheet down here called Invoice Lines. And I'll take my old sheet 1 and rename this to parameters. And I'm going to create a table here. Insert table. And this is where I will put my parameters. So I'm going to have a parameter column and a value column. To make this look less like an Excel sheet, I'm going to remove the grid lines, and let's also format this a little differently. So here's where I could put in my parameters. I could have as many as I want. Maybe I want a customer one, an item one, so on and so forth. I could keep going down here. And here's where I could have someone put in their value. So in this case, maybe even I want this to be a contains filter. So I'm going to do food. Give me customers that contain food. Now, of course, at this point, this doesn't do anything. Back on my invoice lines, I still have all my customers. Ones that contain food, ones that don't. But I can connect my Power Query to this table here. First thing I need to do is I need to add this table into Power Query. You can do that up on Data, and then you go from table range, and pops open Power Query here, and you can see it pulls in my table. Now I just realized something. I need to rename this. I like having meaningful names, so let's actually delete that. Let's keep those changes. Let's change our table name to my parameters. Let's do that again. From table range. Now we get a more meaningful name in Power Query. So it pulled in. Now Power Query is pulling two things. It's pulling data out of Acumatica, and it's pulling data directly out of Excel. And there's my customer parameter right there. But how do I actually use my parameter in my regular OData feed? Let's go back here and let's do first a hard-coded contains filter. I'm going to hard-code in food. So if I click OK there and I close and refresh. Oh, another thing I want to do here. You'll notice it loaded my parameters in as a new table, which is kind of confusing because I have my parameters that I enter, and then it loads back the results of that back into here. You just need to right click on this and change the load to be only create connection. Click OK, and let's get rid of this. So it's only being used in Power Query, not loaded back into Excel. So with my hard-coded filter, I can see now that I'm only getting customers that have food in the name. So that's good, but it's still not dynamic. I mean, if I go in here and I change this to something else like computer, and I refresh this data connection, food is still hard-coded into the filter, so when this is done, it's still only giving me the food customers. So let's go back in here. Let's go back to that filter row that we have, and up on the top in the formula, I want to replace this hard-coded food value with my parameters. And then you can put curly brackets in here to tell it which row you want. Now I'm going to hard code in a row. It starts with row 0, which has my headers, and then this is row 1 underneath my headers. And then which column I want the value. Now since I'm combining queries here, it is going to give me a privacy warning. I'm just going to ignore this and save. So we'll let that think. And let's see here. I'm still having trouble with this. Let's see. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. I think actually the first row is not the headers. I think it's row 0 has my data. Let's try that. All right, good. So now it's able to find all the customers with computers. This is my format. This is the secret sauce, if you will. I want the first record, and I want it from the value column. So if you're going to do multiple parameters, like let's say you had the item parameter and you wanted to use that in a filter, you would just change that to a 1, and that would get your second parameter. And then 2, 3, 4, etc. if you want additional parameters. So let's close and load and just make sure that this works. When this refreshes, and that's finished. Now I get only customers with, did I do computer, computers, computer, singular. And if I scroll down here, I think I even have some customers. There we go. I got Jevi computers and Elevation computers in the result set. And just to verify that, I can flip it back to food. Just change food there. Use refresh up on the top. And when that's finished refreshing, we should only have data where the customer contains food, and there you go. So great, cool little trick there to connect a user enterable parameter into Power Query. Now I want to point out one thing here, additional thing. If we go look at this query, what is happening is Power Query Excel does have to return the entire data set from Acumatica, and it has to return it, and then it filters it in Excel. Now that can cause it to take a long time, especially if you're trying to filter on date or something like that, where you're just trying to eliminate the amount of data that's coming out of Acumatica. There's a way to do that. You can actually do filtering in the OData URL itself. So you could use the same parameters technique and then use the parameters in the OData URL. So I'll drop a little link to some hints on how you can do that in the post over in the forums that this video is being used in.